speak about the question, who am I? And it's something I picked up from Karl Renz. And I think he refers to Ramana Maharshi. And I find it very interesting because in a way it summarizes what, what many people speak about in non-duality and spirituality. And when it comes to the question of who we are. And although it's, in a way a concept or even a graph here, I think it can be very powerful. And so yeah, we'll have a look at that. So it's the 7 stages of identification, or in a way reality. And yeah, let's go into it, because I think there's a lot of confusion of levels when it comes to the question of who we are. We hear expressions such as, we're separated. We hear expressions like awareness, consciousness, the formless, timeless, space, awareness, about the Vedantic approach, about Tantric approach, and many other things, about I amness, and so on. And I think this chart that we're looking at explains that in a very, very strong way. So for those who are not in the Zoom meeting, in Instagram, the chart I'm referring to is also in the story, or yeah, you'll find it in the story, in the last story. But it will also make sense if you don't look at the image. So basically, the starting point, which many times we, as a starting point, as we also discussed last time in detail, we take a separation as a starting point, meaning I feel like I am this body and I'm a separate entity, and basically what I'm driven by is separation. So that which is separated always constantly is looking for validation, because it's separated sort of on its own, and it's looking for validation. It's looking to being loved. It's looking to be respected. It's looking to be liked and to belong. And because it's separate, right? So it constantly needs to fulfill this lack of not belonging, of not being one with everything, and so on. So that's the stage I am, where we usually start. We believe, because we're so identified and with this unfolding of, of the formless, we are so identified with the separation that we constantly try to fill it. But the funny thing is that that's not our starting point, because here in this chart you can see the starting point is the formless, is the timeless, the spaceless, prior to everything, and it's not definable what we are. That's what we are. But as I said last time, I think before I go into details, I will come back with this again. So I also brought it last time, this analogy. So there is separation, right? So, okay, there's the formless, which is basically this hand. And that's the formless, that's who we are. And that's basically everything there is. There's nothing else. And then there's an unfolding of that. Unfolding is one of the first stage that we see here, is the separation. So in the separation, we feel and we take reality to be, I am a separate entity. I'm separate from everything else. There's me and there's all the others. And it would also say, I am this body, I am this mind, I'm those thoughts, and I can be perceived, because everything that's perceivable is an object. Although at this stage, we don't claim to be an object, but we claim to be a subject, okay? So then the second stage is oneness. So oneness is basically saying, I am one with all, I am spirit, and it's the perceiving of things. So it's not the perceived as in the first stage, but it's the perceiving. It's a verb, it's constantly happening, it's appearing, and we feel one with everything. And that's, as you see, there's separation, there's oneness, and this is all together still with the hand. And then the third stage is basically awareness. So you have separation, oneness and awareness. And awareness means I'm the observer, it's the I. So when we go back, it's here. It's I am this body. And the I is the ultimate perceiver, is the observer of everything. Okay? And then the fourth stage is basically, like as you said, these are three fingers of one hand, and that's basically the unfolding of the formula. So in this analogy, this is the formula, is the hand, and all of them are linked to basically this hand, and again the I am, and the I am the body. And so it's not like that, you know, how we usually think that this is like a stage or different levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, and one time I will get there. This is all an unfolding of the formulas, which is always so. And that's, I think, very interesting to see. And then once we've seen that this is, you know, the formulas here, we go back. So if you will, in a way, we go back to the I, the observer, we go back to the I am, and we go back to I am the body. So it's like, in a way, a journey from stage 1, I'm separate, I'm a body, I'm separate from everything, to oneness, to awareness, to the formless, and then going back. It's like the Buddhists say, first there are the mountains, so that's separation. Then there are no mountains, that's the formless. And then there are the mountains again. But the mountains will have a completely different quality, because we have seen through this analogy, we have seen exactly through the separation, that the separation is actually just something that we perceive from a very limited perspective. But the thing is that those are not, you know, 7 different stages that where there's a higher priority, because what we are does not go through stages. It's just a constant unfolding of the formula. So the form is a constant unfolding of the formula. So let's go into those stages, because it's very interesting what's happening there. So, and there's many fallacies when it comes to those different stages. So let's go into the separation. I am a separate entity, right? That's just sort of, let's say, in which, let's say, most of us are operating from. I am a separate entity, I'm this body, and because I think I'm this body, everyone else is also in a body, and so there's many, like 7, 8 billion people around, and that's how I would operate. And as I said earlier, it means that what we identify with is separate from everything. It needs constant validation, and it's a huge effort, because it always feels like there's a lack, something is not whole, and it's, yeah, that's what it's driven by. And when we're operating from that point of view, and we hear about the formula, so what happens is we are all of that at any given time. It's an unfolding. So, but what we do is we take ourselves, we're so obsessed with being that separateness, that we take that separateness and we believe we can become the oneness, we can become the awareness, and we can become the formless as the body, as that separate entity, and that's not possible. When we realize that it's not possible, and it's not needed, because we have, in this unfolding, it seems as if we're the separate body, but at the same time and in no time, we are the formless. And that's the biggest hoax, to try to become oneness, awareness, the formless, which we already are, as the body. And that's exactly the biggest fallacy in spirituality. So here's a question. Okay. So here's a question. Can separation really be perceived? Can separation be perceived? I mean, separation is the perceived. So separation is an object. Yeah. So separation means the formless. Okay, let's go into the stages. Maybe that will explain it. So the formless unfolds itself into awareness. There's an I. There's like the ultimate witness, the ultimate subject. It's observing, witnessing everything that's happening. But there's no there's no I amness yet, and the I amness comes in the oneness. Okay, so in oneness, it's like everything is one. We don't feel identified with the body. It's a very subtle stage, and it's the perceiver. So the subject comes into the realm of reality. Then there's oneness and one with all, that I just said, and then there's the separation. So separation is the perceived, meaning meaning now I identify with object. That which can be perceived is an object. So everything that can be perceived, including this body mind, is an object. By definition, an object here means it can be perceived, it can be sensed with hearing, touching, smelling, and so on. And that's why it's perceived. So can separation really be perceived? Yes, it's perceived on certain levels. Can the formless, spaceless perceive it? Obviously not. It needs the I, it needs the I am, and it needs the I am a separate entity to be perceived, you see? It's just like basically a big divine play but there's no separate entities, you know? So the question, okay, look, so many people, when they look at this, they will be like, oh yeah, you know, I'm still stuck at the I am the body level. But who is saying that? What is saying that? Nobody is stuck anyone, because again, there's no separate entities. There's only the formless, which is unfolding. So when we hear the sentence, oh, I must be here, or I'm stuck at this stage, it doesn't make any sense. But what happens is we give this so much trust and credit, those words and those thoughts, that this has a huge impact on how we perceive reality. And yeah, it's basically, and that's, you know, so you see those different levels, but the question is, in a way, or the interesting point is, what seemingly makes us stay in one level, at the I am the body level. And I think putting our trust in thoughts and feelings is probably the biggest enabler, in a way, to have us stay there. Because what, you know, the function of thoughts, I mean, there's thoughts occurring constantly, and thoughts, the nature of thoughts is to jump from the past to the future, past, future, past, future. So it goes into the past, because what happens is the following: there's separation, right? There's a sense of separation, and it says basically, I did exist and I will exist. So in this present moment, which the separation cannot comprehend, it automatically draws the conclusion that it's existing right now. But this is a separation of everything, and it doesn't exist. That's why it constantly needs to be identified in a way with the thinking system, because otherwise it's afraid of its own death. So here's another question: if there is no separate entity, how can it be perceived? Well, there is no separate entity. So it's important to see that no separate entity, a separate entity does not exist, right? It's just a bundle of thoughts and feelings that says, oh, I'm a separate entity. It never actually becomes a separate entity. That's important. So how can it be perceived? It cannot be perceived because it doesn't exist, as you rightfully say. But what happens is objects can be perceived, right? And as I said, when you really look at what you are, as I said, there's the 7 stages. But when you look at the body mind can be perceived. But what usually happens when we ask the question, there is such a split second of a moment which makes those two one. You know, I'm talking about the body mind right now. But when we ask the question, if there's no separate entity, how can it be perceived? It cannot. But what happens when we ask this question is, we take this to be one. Body, mind, and separate entity, I as one. But there's body, mind, and this separate entity is just a story that is being told. So that doesn't exist. And that's a thing we have to catch, which is really important. So yeah, and as I said, one of the biggest fallacies that we try to do is exactly that, is that as a separate entity, which doesn't exist, we try to become the I am spirit, the I am the observer, and the formless. Although, because we're so, in a way, so identified with this, and we believe those thoughts, again, coming back to the thoughts are about the past and the future. There's around, I don't know, 70,000, 80,000 thoughts that come, and they all, when we put our trust in them, they all tell us that we are separate and we're that entity. So it's about, in a way, putting that trust in thoughts that we usually do in sort of a default state. And it's not easy for many of us to even see that there's a thought stream and there's us, sort of, that what we are is, let's say in this analogy, is we're in the background and there's a thought stream coming, right? And by, let's say there's a thought coming, and usually what we do is we interfere, because there's a tendency of saying, oh yeah, I want only good thoughts and I don't want the bad ones, and I want to solve all my problems. But by doing that, by trying to solve our problems on the thought level, we actually create them, because what we are is prior to them. So that's, I think, one of the biggest fallacies that is out there, that we're seemingly stuck in the separation, which never actually happens. All of this, what we see here in this chart, is actually never happening. It's like appearing and disappearing, but it never actualizes. It never becomes reality. And yeah, that's like, when we hear this as the body mind, it's too much for it to understand, because it pretends to be a body mind. So if the body mind hears, hey, I'm oneness or I'm awareness, it doesn't go anywhere. But if we as the formless hear that we are not a separate entity, we are not this, it reminds us, and it goes like back and says, oh yeah, true, and that, I think, works very well. So, and what also happens a lot, I think it's another fallacy, is that we are basically, there's an identification, there's an unfolding of, I am a separate entity. And as the separate entity, we heard about oneness. We hear about everything is one, and there's one love, and I'm one with all, and I'm the spirit, and there's a higher self, and so on, right? We hear that a lot as well, like in yoga circles and meditation and religion as well. And what usually happens is, so that's one of the stages, right? But what usually happens is, when we take that as the separation, then we completely obscure it, and it doesn't go anywhere, because then we walk around, the body walks around, says, hey, guess what? I'm oneness with everything. And somehow it doesn't feel right, because it's a natural unfolding anyway, and we can just let it unfold. And the oneness, we can feel it, it's also about compassion. It's about, seeing that there's no such thing as time, and we see there's no space. It's just a being, and that being, or that feeling of oneness, and it's not a feeling, it's more like a state. That state of oneness, it's very close to love and also joy, and we feel much better when we're in this unfolding, in a way. So here's another question from Duke Hunter. Can you differentiate between reality and actuality? Seems like reality is related to self. Actuality is the real reality. Okay, again, we're in reality and actuality. Seems like reality is related to self. Actuality is the real. I mean, I usually don't use those terms much different. I don't know. Maybe you can ask again exactly what you're looking for, but I mean, reality, actuality. So what I can say about it is, reality, like, in a way, all the events that are happening, we always talk a lot about reality, but if you think about what's actually happening, there's many things that are happening that are appearing and disappearing, but it never actually happens. Like, it never happens as to say that, it materializes. It never materializes, because there's always events are happening, appearing, disappearing, and it never actually materializes or actualizes. So I don't know if that helps, but the only reality in a way is the formless. And you know, as I said earlier, this is the formless, this is separation, oneness, and awareness. And the only reality that you see is basically the formless, and there's an unfolding of the formless, and that's the only reality. But we can't, there's no reality in the separate world. Like, I will give one, I think maybe this helps to explain maybe about this reality. So there's one, okay, if you take, let's say, a table, okay? Maybe you see a table. So let's say there's a table, and when I ask you about the reality of the table, or how do you know it exists, the table? And if somebody asks me, how do I know it exists? I would say, yeah, I can touch it, I can feel it, and that's why I think it exists, right? And so then if I said, you know, does the table also exist without the five senses, without perceiving it? So does the perceived exist without the perception? If I had to answer from my first-hand experience, if I have I ever seen a table, you already see, has a table ever existed without me being, you know, the perceiver of it? I have to say no, because every time I see a table, or I'm aware of a table, or I say a table exists, it has always existed in my awareness, in my perception, okay? And so does that mean then, in a way, that the table, I can only say from my first-hand experience that I have only experienced tables when I have seen them, touched them, and so on. Otherwise, they don't exist for me. And then I would have to say, isn't it so that the table does not exist outside of my perception? So only in the realm of my perception this table exists. That's what I can say with 100% confidence. And if I ask myself, and that, you know, comes to reality. So how real is that table? If it is fully dependent on my perception. And then I can say, okay, but how do I know I perceive? That's one level back. And then I would need to say, I know I perceive because there's an awareness of the perception. So then I would say, okay, look, here's the table, here's the perception, and here's the awareness. So everything I know about the table, isn't it then the case that everything I know about the table is awareness? Because perception is taking place in awareness, and the table is taking place in perception. So if I then had to rely on my first-hand experience, and I don't have anything else other than thoughts and feelings that I said, you know, it's maybe better not to put our trust there. And wouldn't I have to say then that the table, if I asked for the substance, what is this table truly made of? Wouldn't I have to say, if I fully rely on my first-hand experience, that it's made of awareness? And I like this because, in my eyes, it explains very beautifully, reality, if you want. So it also explains the unfolding of the separate table, which it takes to be separate. It claims, oh, the table exists no matter what. Whether there is someone there with a perception or not, whether there's a video camera or not, it exists. And there's nothing, no perception there, then the table, nobody has ever experienced that a table is there without having the perception or, you know, a video camera or anything like this. So I hope that answers your question. So yeah, and so yeah, I think, as I said, the 7 stages that we talked about, and you know, I think what's also a very important point here is when we go from steps 1 to 7, so separation, oneness, awareness, to formless, which is this, and then back to awareness of oneness and separation. And this step back is very important because we will see the whole world through completely different eyes, and this is something amazing. But so let's talk about this. So when the unfolding is in the first stage of separation, I'm a separate entity, and going back to the formless to say, hey, look, I'm not this separation. I'm not this body. I know deep inside, I know it cannot be everything. And if I go to stage 2, oneness, and stage 3, awareness, and stage 4, the formless, this is what we usually call is the Vedantic approach, right? It means I am excluding everything that I think I am. So meaning everything that can be perceived. And you know, most of the time we forget the body mind of here, because we believe we look out from here, but the consciousness awareness is coming from here, and the body mind can be perceived. So this is the way from stage 1 to 4 of saying I'm neither this nor that. It's like the neti approach, right? I'm not this, I'm not that. So I'm not the thoughts, I'm not the feelings, I'm not the events happening. And if you go on a very superficial level, it would be I'm not my country, I'm not my skin, I'm not my gender, I'm not, you know, I don't know, a football club or a family or whatever we usually identify with. So this is the point of saying, yeah, I'm not this body, I'm not these thoughts, I'm not the feelings. And then we realize, and as I said, we do this many times. When we do this from the perspective of what we're not, which sort of excludes that, it doesn't go very far, because the body is saying, I'm not the body. That doesn't go anywhere, right? But so it's important to go a step back and see that this body mind is an object that can be perceived, and then we exclude this as well, and then it's basically very simple. But so this isn't a very important approach, but you know, many times what I see is that, you know, there's in a way, people are afraid to let go fully and say, hey, but I cannot let go of all the identifications, because what do I identify with them? I saw the other day, I saw some quote which I really like. It's that the bad news is that you're in a free fall, and the good news is that there is no ground. So I think that summarizes it very beautifully, because as I said, we're identified with something, and that which is identified, it's sort of afraid of fully letting go and losing its identity. And it requires, you know, to be brave and to go forward, because everything around us, the friends, the family, what we read in media, it all tells us, hey, how can you say I'm not this body, I'm not separate? We are all separate, and we need to hold hands, and we need to do everything together. But you know, it's very strong to anchor one back, but it doesn't make any sense, because it's important to have this, you know, this boldness in a way to say, hey, I go all the way. And that's very important, because to say I'm not anything, but this which identifies with, you know, the body mind and is trying to hold on very hard, this is basically in a way the death of the sense of self, and it's fighting very hard to stay there. And but it's important to overcome that, because otherwise we're sort of stuck. You know, I'm sure you probably have all experienced that, in a way that something in you tells you, hey, you're a separate entity, but then something tells you, no, you're much more, you're this higher self and the awareness, and in a way you're stuck between the two. And you know, it's like a seesaw on a playground, right? You're like, here, you're the separate entity, you're one separate entity, one is. And many times, you know, we experience this, that we may be more than what we take ourselves to be, and then, I don't know, somehow we lose interest, or it's not strong enough, or our friends, they take us, you know, we don't want to look crazy in front of our friends or whatever. But I think at some point the question comes, you know, what is more important in my life? Is it more important to make my friends happy, to make my parents happy, to make society happy, to make my manager happy, or to go all the way and say, hey, you know what, I listen to, you know, to this formless, to what I am, and go all the way. And funnily, because there's a voice in us saying, hey, but if I give up everything, and even being my body and everything, then I will end up with nothing. But yes, it's true, we will end up with nothing, but this is not happening on the body mind level, you see. And I think this is the fascinating thing, because yes, you will end up with nothing, but the body-mind will continue. And that's one of the big fallacies as well. You know, it's not like that from stage one separation, the body-mind goes on a journey. It's not. And that's exactly one of the biggest fallacies, that we think the body-mind is going on a journey to become oneness, to become awareness, and to become the formless. But that doesn't work like this, because it's, as I said earlier, the formless is unfolding. The formless is unfolding as separation, as oneness, and as the awareness. So yeah, it's kind of absurd or insane that we believe that we as the body mind we become nothing. Because even now, whether you believe in separation, or whether this is sort of your, you know, everyday, I don't know, unfolding, or whether you're in the awareness, doesn't matter. The separation never becomes reality. It never actualizes, it never realizes. And that's why it's totally fine to fully let go, because the action figure, this character in this movie that we take ourselves to be, this separate entity, it goes its own way. It's almost like there's a script of a movie, and it's written already what's going to happen. Yeah. So you, whether you are starting to believe that there's free will or not, or whether you think you have to give up who you are or an identity or whatever, it has nothing to do with the story of the movie ever. And I think this is an important distinction, because yeah, many people, they don't go further because there's a lot of fear of this death of or of giving up of something that they are not. And yeah, when we see that there has never been any free will, that there has never any been control, that there has never, even the giving up is not actually happening, you know. And I think this is like when we see this, you know, when we hear it as the body, it sounds weird, but when we see this, when we experience this, then it becomes very obvious that there's nothing to lose, because what we are is nothing in the first place. And there's an unfolding happening, but even that, you know, the unfolding is coming in waves, and yeah, and I think, as I said also as well, the most important thing is there will be those voices, you know, saying, oh yeah, I came a long way, you know, many times I feel the being the awareness and the oneness and the formless, but you know, 40% of the time I'm still in the separate world. But you it's not possible. You can never become the separate entity ever. You can never become the oneness, even. You can never become the awareness, because you are what you are. And that's why I like the sentence which says, be what you cannot not be. And that's always a direct reminder to that you're this, and you're all of that. So as I said, the journey from separation to oneness to awareness is important, because what also happens a lot is, what I see is that in the unfolding of the separation, we hear being oneness, what I said earlier, and then the separation is pretending to be oneness, and it doesn't lead anywhere. You know, it's like, I don't know, when you, like, you know, the body mind is chanting, I'm not this body, I'm oneness, I'm one with all. Yeah, as I said, it doesn't go anywhere. It just stays spiritual. And it's just basically the separation is trying to complete or to fulfill its lack. And yeah, it's just basically, it could also just eat ice cream, or I don't know, go on holidays, or I don't know, just satisfy the needs. I think it's the same. There's this nice quote, I think, or like passage in Siddhartha, the book by Hermann Hesse, and it talks about this. You know, these two who have been trying to, they have lived with you know, people who don't eat anything in the forest. They have tried to do the most holy rituals and everything, and then they come to the city, and they realize, you know, what they're doing is nothing better than if somebody drinks alcohol, or if somebody satisfies their needs in whatever way. And that's really important to see, because many of us, we try to be holy, or we try to, you know, we pretend like now we're on a path that is, yeah, very spiritual or very holy, and we become something special, you know. But this is all happening in the realm of separation, and it's important to see that, because nobody tells us. It's not like there should be like a warning statement, like they have on cigarettes, where you say, hey, if you take too many of this, then you may die. And I feel like in spirituality it should be the same, like in a way that it doesn't go anywhere. Like if we do all of these exercises and rituals as the separation, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just, as I said, you can just go to, I don't do anything. As I said, I also, like, as I always say, there's nothing wrong with meditation, there's nothing wrong with yoga and all these things. But when we obscured by identifying with the separate entity and then do it in order to become oneness or awareness, then it doesn't work, it doesn't go anywhere. So here's another comment or question or two. Can you say a bit about how to identify and stay still in awareness? That's exactly the point, that you see that there's no like the 10 to-dos that we can do, because what wants to do something, the how questions and the why questions, they always come from the separation. And so it's not some, when we pretend like, okay, now I'm here, but how can I get there? That's already too late. Like I could give you probably 100 things that you could do, but it wouldn't go anywhere, because we would just continue staying in the separation, because there's no two. There's not anywhere to go to. As I said earlier, this is what we are. We are all of this, the formless, and we are the separation, the oneness, and the awareness. So, from your question, it comes out that this is a question asked from separation, and it's sort of saying, okay, I'm separate, I'm here, that's my starting point, but I want to become awareness, right? And I want to stay in awareness, and whatever can go and come and go, that's not it. That's not what we're talking about here. That's like states. We're not talking about states. These are like unfoldings, in a way, identities, and you can't do anything. Like, from the perspective of the formless, there's just unfolding happening, but you are not located anywhere of that. And yeah, so ask yourself, instead of going into that question, I would ask yourself, what is trying to identify and stay in awareness? What or who is trying to do that? And I think when you see that this is the separate entity, which doesn't even exist, when it comes from that question, then I think this would help. This is a pointer to what you are. There's this famous quote also by Ramana Maharshi, which says, in a way, presupposing a non-existing entity, and then looking for salvation for this non-existing entity, isn't that just reinforcing the non-existing entity? It's exactly that. So we're trying to find a solution to something that doesn't even exist, the problem, and that continues the problem. And I think, that's my take on that. So don't try, I guess the worst we could do is to try to ask the separate entity to try to become the oneness and the awareness, because that keeps us just in the separation, and it doesn't go anywhere. So here's another comment. I'm curious about your incarnation cross at human design system. What do you mean by that? I don't understand the question. So here's another comment. Why someone close to us sometimes doesn't feel our existence? Why someone close to us sometimes doesn't... What do you mean by that? Can you please elaborate? Yeah. So yeah, just elaborate on those questions. I'm happy to answer them. So yeah, again, I think the key here is to, the key here is not to follow any guidance or any how questions or why questions, but the main thing is to always go back to what we are, the formless, in a way. and see that those things are just happening, and not trying to get stuck and say, oh look, I'm this awareness. And if there's, in a way, one technique is always to question the status quo. It's always about saying, like, if there's a thought coming, oh, how I'm stuck in separation, how can I become awareness, and how can I become liberated? Then it's better to ask instead of asking that, because that will lead nowhere, because you have never been not liberated, you see. So instead of asking that, is one thing is what you can do is not to go into thoughts, because that's in a way the glue of all of that. That's like the clue. We are liberated. Something that we have identified with is pretending not to be liberated. And that's the clue, the thought. Trusting, putting our trust in thoughts is the clue. So the thought system will always tell us that we're separate. That's like its function. So here again, why a close person to me is not able to feel my existence? Like, is it like that, I don't know, a friend of yours, they don't understand that you exist? Or I don't understand exactly. Like, they don't see that the body might exist, or that you don't exist at all? I'm not quite sure. Any other questions or comments? Okay, here. Human design is a test that shows our mechanics and which aura we carry, and what's your role, what's our role in this matrix. It really helped me to flow. Okay, great. Yeah, I heard about human design. And what our role is in this matrix. It really helped me. Okay. Okay, so your close friend. So why your close friend is not able to feel my existence? And what do you mean by your existence? Like, maybe you just elaborated it, because it doesn't ring a bell. And yeah, human design and our aura, and there are great things, very subtle things that we can do, right? And I think with everything, I think there's energetic work on the body, there's very subtle things, and we identify with many subtle things. But I think the most important in all of this is to see that to be reminded in a way of the formless that's always there. So as I said earlier, while pretending or seemingly being in the separation, while seemingly being in the oneness, while seemingly being in the awareness, it's always an unfolding of the formless of what we are, the love, the joy. And I think in anything we do, even when it comes to subtle energies, everything, those are all objects, that can be perceived. And I think it's important to not forget what we truly are, because I can see many people, and I myself also had tendencies many years ago, like, because there are so many interesting things about energy and about healing and about telepathy and about, I don't know, many different things. And those things are interesting to do, but when you see what you truly are and clearly see that, then none of this is really interesting, because this is all happening in that, you see. And I think it's just important not to get lost in those subtle energies and everything. And to always come back of, this subtle energy work is great for the body mind, but not to forget what we truly are. So existence includes me as a person. I am. So yeah, coming back to the question, why a close person to me is not able to feel my existence. I mean, I don't know, that seems like, I don't know, like a relationship question, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm the best to answer that. I would need to know a bit more. Maybe you can write to me a DM, and I'm happy to get back to you on that. Here's another question. Can there ever be an I that is perceived? I mean, it depends on how we use the term I. So usually in everyday life, we use it as I am this body, right? How I was saying about separation. And that can be perceived, obviously. But this I, the awareness, the observer, it cannot be perceived because it's not yet in the existence of being an object. So the first, maybe what's also interesting is, the first perceivable object, in the most subtle version is light or sound. You have, for instance, they call it the humming of the universe. It's like, maybe you have heard it, but like if you're, let's say it's still, there's nothing around, and there's like a humming of the universe, and you can hear it's like this. It's like, I think the comes from that. It's like a constant humming, and I think when you're still enough, when your mind is not occupied, and when you're in a way in touch with your surroundings, you can you can hear that in a way. It's not a sound, but it's sort of almost a raw version of a sound, and that can be perceived. Yeah, that's the first perception, and also light. So, but the I as such cannot be perceived. Every time I question who am I, though the thoughts disappears, but there are still sensations going on. What to do about that? It feels more deeper than thoughts. Yes, that's a very good question. Um, so, so I think, like, in a way, the hardest thing is to go. Like, I think the first stage, and it's already a huge stage, is in a way to understand that we are able to observe thoughts. Yeah, observing thoughts is already, I think, a huge step towards freedom in a way. And to see that they're not from us, they're not about us, and they can't come to us. And we can use them as an instrument, but they can't control whether on a Saturday afternoon we're sitting and just observing nature, and they can come and say, "Oh my God, you may die in 2 weeks," and we would go fully into it, and they lose the power over that when we see that they're not from us and about us. So that's already huge, right? But now, as you describe, you have there's, like, if you're able to see that, but then there's still sensations and the feeling, and it's a very strong feeling as well to say, oh, but I feel like I'm a separate entity, right? And in a way, it's important to work from all of those sides on all levels. Thought is one thing, and another thing is the feeling and sensation. So it's not just only that I identify myself on a thought level, but I also feel like I am one. And that's just the same as feeling, as and thoughts. So thoughts and feelings are, in a way, they're both objects because you can perceive them. So the same thing when you're able to observe thoughts is also the sensations. So instead of giving meaning to them, those sensations, and instead of trying to get rid of them, what you do is, usually they stuck or they stay when we have a certain resistance. So whatever we resist persists. So if you feel like you don't know what to do with the sensations and the feelings, I just recommend that you look into what you persist, or you try to control them, or you try to manipulate them, and just don't interfere with them. Let them happen. Let them come up. A feeling or a sensation, it just wants to be felt. Like, if you think about a baby is basically just, it's fully open and it's just expressing. In 1 second, it may cry, and in another second, it may smile, right? So this is sort of what we have lost, because what we have done with the body mind is we try to attract only the positive, and we try to avoid the negative. So we have built like a system of resistance, and that's sort of a residue, that there may be. So I think it's important to to, like, as you say rightfully, this is what we're talking about here. It cannot be purely solved on a thought level, because it goes way beyond that. So it's a good question, and I think it's just important to allow those feelings. And what's important as well is not to believe that, there's sometimes this belief, okay, once I have managed and controlled my sensations, then I'm liberated. But that's also, it doesn't make any sense, because those sensations, they're on the level of the body mind, but it has nothing to do with you. So don't worry too much about it. Like, deal with it. Don't run away from it, obviously, but also don't go into it, because they will take care of themselves. It's like, when you go for a walk in the forest, you don't have to take your foot every step and be aware of everything your foot is doing. It's just doing itself. The body mind is an autonomous system, so you don't have to worry about that. We only worry about it or are obsessed with it when we identify with it, but otherwise it works on its own. So here's another comment: should I be more aware of the sensation or should I ignore it? Yeah, so become more aware of it, let it happen, but don't analyze it, don't give it meaning, don't draw conclusions. Just but give it attention. It's coming and it wants attention. That's it. So here's another question: what's the first step in observing? How does one untangle itself from the thoughts? Okay, that's a good question. As I said, it really sounds basic, but I think the more we, in a way, master this, the more freedom will come. It's really a huge thing. So the first step in observing is when you become aware of judgment. Like, I would say this is the first basic step. The first basic step is, let's say, there's two things you can do. One is you sit in stillness and you just observe, right? And what will happen is there will be thoughts coming, there will be feelings coming, there will be a thought coming, oh, why I'm sitting here? Oh, I don't like sitting here. Oh, it's not comfortable. Why am I doing it? I can still do it later. It's fine, So there's a thought stream coming like this, and what's important is then not to go into those thoughts, but try to stay in the observer role. I think that's crucial. So, like, when a thought comes, usually what happens is we interfere with the thoughts. Oh yeah, I have to go shopping tomorrow, and then we continue going that thought. But what you can do is stay in the observer and just see those thoughts as if clouds come by, as if clouds come and go. Like a thought, I have to go shopping tomorrow. I have to go shopping tomorrow. It just comes and goes. Like, oh, I didn't do a great job in that last email I sent to my manager. What does he think of me? Those thoughts come, but you just let them come and go. Usually we think, oh yeah, I have to go in, and we believe that we can solve problems by going into those thoughts, but it doesn't make sense. So, and then when you are, during the day, let's say, when the events are happening, then become aware of judgment, of comparison, of analyzing, and so on. That's like another first step that you can do during everyday life, because when you're just becoming aware of them, what happens is there's like a space that's created, and out of that space you will see something is happening. So we have maybe one or two more questions. But these sensations are too energetic, and sometimes it feels that if I pay more attention, I'm gonna burst up or I can't handle it. Is there something wrong with it? I would need to understand it in a bit more details, but I would say in general, as again, sensations or thoughts or energy, it just wants to be felt. It's sort of telling us, hey, I'm here, you haven't paid much attention to me, you've been running away or trying to conceptualize it or try to push me away, just come. And all it wants to be felt. It could be, in the moment when the sensation comes, it can feel very overwhelming, but when you try to avoid it and ignore it, it will become stronger and stronger. So imagine it's like in your aura or in your energy field, that a sensation comes and be like, hey, feel me, I want to be felt, and you feel it and it goes away. But if it comes and you say, you say, hey, sorry, but don't do anything, like go away, what are you doing here, I didn't invite you to the party. And then what happens is that it will be stuck in that energy field, and it will be stuck there, it will stay there, and it will become slowly bigger and bigger, and you will try to push it away more and more and more, but it will become bigger and bigger. So that's why at first, when you allow those sensations to come up again, it may feel as if it's overwhelming and very strong, but in that moment I think it's important to let it happen and maybe dedicate that time, and be ready to be overwhelmed and just let it happen. I think that's the only way. You can't run away from emotions, and you don't have to. And yeah, it may be overwhelming, but I think that's the only way. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Don't think there's anything wrong. Here's another question: why can't we bear emotions like fear, etc.? So yeah, I think fear is just an emotion that happens, right? There's nothing good or bad about it. When it becomes bad or unbearable, what you say, it's usually what I just explained. So fear is coming, it could be any kind of fear, and there's something in us which is trying to push it away and says, oh no, I'm not allowed to have fear, or oh my God, this fear will destroy my life, or I can't handle this, or this is too much for me. So we constantly interfere with it, and we push it away and try to control it. So what we try to control is bound to control us. So the unbearable part is not the feeling itself, but it's this resistance, and the resistance we build against it, and that becomes too much. But it becomes never too much, but it seems as if it's becoming too much and not bearable. So the best thing we can do is just to open up and say, yeah, invite them to the party, and dance with them. I think that's the best thing we can do. So here, the last question today is: can you also talk a bit about your daily routine? Um, I don't have much of a routine, but I think, some people say, yeah, meditation is good, sitting still, I mean, doing work for the body, and so on. But I mean, I can speak about it some other time, but there were certain things that were happening to me energetically in my body, and so I don't feel the need to do any of this. But I think ultimately it's not about sitting down 20 minutes here and there and do meditation and then doing yoga and then forget about it, and then just jump into everyday life and we forget about all the spiritual stuff. I think it doesn't work. It can be an entry, I think, and for many it works. But I think what helps is obviously to eat health. Like when we speak about the body, like, well, okay, again, if someone needs a routine, it's the body mind. Like what we are doesn't need a routine. What helps, let's say, is to be reminded, and that's why I'm doing these talks, is to be reminded of what we truly are. And that, I think, helps a lot, to not be lost in the separation, and to see that it has no significance at all what's happening here. I think that's the key. So that could be a routine, to be reminded twice a week, I don't know, every day, with a quote or with something you have, a book, I don't know. So reminders, I think, are important for the body mind. It's healthy eating, sleep, yeah, I mean, the usual things. And then I think what's important is, in a way, to prime yourself in that what you are. So, you can just sit still and observe and do that with great attention. That helps. And then one other thing is that I think is very important is to catch those thoughts and catch those feelings in the moment they happen every day. Because, I speak to many people, and on a certain level, they understand what we speak about here, and also not just understand intellectually, but also on an experiential level. But then it seems like that there's many blind spots during the day. Let's say I'm aware of why I get angry in certain situations, but then the situation comes and we totally forget about it. It happens a lot. So I think it's a lot about reminders. So I can just see here that the time is over. We have 20 seconds left. So anyway, thank you guys for joining and making this great thing here. We do this every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Swiss time. And I think it's over. Why is the connection so bad? I don't understand.